This just in, the White House changes course and admits that there is a recession. But it's only in Joe Biden's hairline. That was the big debate this week. Are we in a recession or we're not in a recession? There are some signals that we are in a recession because we've had two quarters of negative growth, but at the same time, the stock market is rising. Corporations, especially the oil corporations, are recording record profits. The interest rates have gone up, and of course we have inflation. So there's a whole bunch of a melange of things going on that wouldn't happen during a recession, and some things that would. But will they have to admit they were wrong eventually? If it becomes much more clear that because of what the Fed is doing, raising interest rates, we are in a recession. And that's one of my topics here today, admitting you were wrong. Janet Yellen has admitted, she came on, she said, I was wrong about inflation. We got inflation. She thought it was going to be transitory and gone soon. When Obama promised that if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor, and then it turned out not to be true for a small sliver of people who were on Obamacare. He went on television and said, I am sorry, I was wrong. I was wrong if some people were misled about this, but that's what he actually thought. So there's two people there who said, I was wrong. Now, welcome to Richard Bey Talk. I'm here with Albert Reinoso, who always wants to tell me when I'm wrong about something. But when I'm wrong about something, it's usually a gaffe.
Yeah, no, I don't say you're wrong. I correct you on
you
things
correct me, right?
That may have been,
And when you do, I say you're right.
Yes, you do. Yes,
and
you do.
It's usually a gaffe. Like 2 weeks ago, instead of saying Lauren Boebert, I said Lorena Bobbitt.
Right.
And you told me right afterwards. Now, last week, I was talking about Josh Hawley and the way he hawlied ass out of Congress on January 6th.
Right.
And I had a friend call me and she said, why do you keep calling him Josh Hawley? And I listened to it, and of course I did. And I know what it is. And when I was at Yale Drama School, I had a voice teacher. And my best friend and my roommate was from New Orleans. And she would put a pen in one hand and a pin in the other. She'd say, Andy, what's in your left hand? He'd say, a pin. And what's in your right hand? A pin. And then she'd go over and over this. And I had a very thick New York accent that she beat out of me. I used to say coffee and car. And in fact, my first car, I have recordings of myself describing it as a common gear. Because you stick the R somewhere where you don't. So at Yale, when they got rid of my New York accent, I overcompensated. I now say coffee instead of coffee. But I say coffee. And I think that's why I said Hawley instead of Hawley, But yes, Hawley is probably the preferred pronunciation. I was wrong. I said it. Okay.
Mistakes.
Po buddies nerfect, as one of my favorite sayings. Now, one of the most embarrassing ones for me was when I was 15, my family took a trip cross country. And in fact, I had my 16th birthday in Salt Lake City. And we were driving across Montana and we went to the Little Bighorn. And I read the sign and I said, and it said, as I read it, this is where a large army of Sioux Indians. And my parents burst out laughing. That's how traumatic it was. I said Sioux Indians. And my mother said, no, it says Sioux. I said, but it has an X in it. Because I hadn't heard it pronounced. So, we all do make gaffes. And I was thinking about that this week and about admitting when you were wrong. And that's what a lot of the things on today's podcast are going to be about, where I admit that I was wrong and others don't admit that they were wrong. And Albert, do you believe in synchronicity?
In what way?
In that you need something and then something happens. Or, for instance, when I was on television in Philadelphia. I had to wear a tuxedo on the show.
Mhm.
And I couldn't find cufflinks. I couldn't find studs for the French shirt. And I'm walking down the street and I see a baggie on the sidewalk. And I go to the corner, there's a red light, and I said, that looked like a bag of pot. Let me go see what it is. So I go over and I pick it up, and inside are diamond studs and jade cufflinks,
Wow.
just what I needed for the show
Mhm.
that morning. Now, I call that a coincidence, but it had some kind of significance. I think that the human mind is configured to look for
No question.
things that relate to each other, and some
No
people
question.
have more
When you
skill
look
at
for a
that.
new car, all you see is that car that you want. You don't
That's
see the
right.
other cars.
All
But
right.
I believe
So,
coincidence is what makes for a life. That's what life is all about.
all
Coincidence.
right. Well, here's the coincidence. So I'm thinking about doing this show about people who admit that they were wrong about something.
Mm.
And then the New York Times, there it is. I was wrong. Do you know the New York Times changed? They used to have something called the review section, and now they just changed it to the Sunday opinion section. So you'll be more likely to understand that this is not a factual review, it's an opinion of certain people. But it has inside a bunch of people who admit that they were wrong. David Brooks, I was wrong about capitalism. Gail Collins, she was wrong to go after Mitt Romney for putting a dog on the roof of his car. Big effing deal.
Why does she think she was wrong about that?
Because I think, according to the article, she thinks she made a big deal out of it. She mentioned it so many times,
Much
and
ado
that it,
about
it
nothing.
wasn't germane to
Mhm.
really running for president. Here's another one. I was wrong about Trump voters, Brett Stevens. In this article, he says, I think they had a legitimate concern about their alienation. Michelle Goldberg, this is kind of Weasley. I was wrong about Al Franken. Remember when Al
Yeah,
Franken, the Me Too movie?
yeah.
Yeah, but what she says is wrong is that he should have had his day in court in Congress.
Yes, everybody should.
And that's what
I said that from the start.
I know, but she doesn't say that he was railroaded. She said,
Mm.
"Oh, I know some people who said he played grab ass when he would take pictures with people." That's what she says. But she says due process is important, whether or not a person did what he or she was accused of. And then, of course, Paul Krugman. I was wrong about inflation, like Janet Yellen.
Wow.
He didn't see it coming. So people sometimes do admit that they're wrong about things. At the end of this podcast, I'm going to admit that I was wrong about voting for Ralph Nader and thinking there was no difference between Al Gore and George Bush. They were both corporatists, and it wouldn't make a difference which one was elected. Because think about it. If Al Gore had been elected and inaugurated in 2001, we'd have 20 years head start against global warming. Of course, what probably would have happened was after 9/11, the Republicans would have blamed it on Al Gore and said the Democrats are responsible for this. They wouldn't have rallied around the president the way the entire country did for George Bush after 9/11. So, predicting alternative history, which is one of my favorite topics, is always an endeavor that has a lot of moving pieces in it. All right, so I've been right about a lot of things. I mean, when I did the Jennifer Flowers show, that was what 14 months before Monica Lewinsky came on the scene and shut down the government, and Bill Clinton's character became a national issue. So I was right to be concerned about that 14 months earlier. I was right about the WMD evidence for the war in Iraq. Now, I thought Obama had a real chance to be elected in the first time around, and I worked on a station where there were only two white guys, I think, that worked there. It was a station primarily geared towards an African-American audience in New York. And almost all the people called up and were supportive of Hillary Clinton and not Obama. And I said to my co-host, Mark Riley, who was probably the best, most intelligent co-host I've ever had in my life. And I said, what is this? You have a chance to elect the first African-American president, and all the listeners who are Black are calling in and they are supporting Hillary. And he said, well, I will never say this on the air. I guess I can say it now, reveal it now. He said, I'll never say this on the air. He said, but if Obama became president of the United States, everything they've believed in their life, in their worldview, would have to be reassessed. And basically he meant that Black people cannot get ahead in America. Black people cannot get the support of white people in America. I'm assuming that's what he said. And they would believe that a Black man cannot be elected president, even though I believed he could, and he did. Let's see. So, a mistake. We are told over and over again with these text messages and emails of the Secret Service that it was just a mistake. Oh, we were wrong. We were, what do they call it? Transmitting to a new server or something, and they all got lost. Yeah, right. Just like Rosemary Woods and the dog who ate the kids' homework. Remember Rosemary Woods? Oh, dear me, I don't know what happened. You know, I'm transcribing the tapes with my foot, and I must have hit the wrong pedal, and I erased 5 minutes. I know there's 18 minutes that just disappeared with Nixon talking to Haldeman, but I can't explain what happened other than I was wrong. I made a mistake. Yeah, right. And the kid had the dog eat his homework, too. There are gaps in the White House call logs. The presidential daily diary contains no information between 1:21 p.m. and 4:03 p.m. on January 6th. Oh my God, what a coincidence. You know, Albert believes in coincidences.
It runs life.
I know. Mark Meadows, too, was burning papers in his office after meeting with one of the Republican members, congressman, who was plotting the coup, but he was burning the papers. Well, maybe it was just a cold day, and the radiators weren't working in the White House that day. Chad Wolf, who was the Homeland Security chief, and the deputy security right under him, Ken Cuccinelli, they have their text messages missing from this key period. And then, of course, Trump took some of the classified material to Mar-a-Lago. How do you make something that happened seem like it never happened? Every time this commercial comes on, I think about what they've done with the text messages, with the presidential log, with the removal of classified documents.
How do you make like it never even happened? Happen? Fire it up, Randy! By being prepared for anything. That's how you make like it never even happened.
Thanks, guys. See you tomorrow.
Yeah, it never even happened. All the stuff that went on January 6th, it never happened now. Kind of makes the whole, but her emails, the Clinton emails, it kind of makes that sort of quaint, doesn't it? Do you remember this? Just a week before the election, Fox News was reporting this. Take a look at this picture. There. Brett Baer. FBI sources believe the Clinton Foundation case moving towards likely an indictment. Now, that was FBI sources. People here are, on television, the pundits are saying, well, we're not hearing anything from the DOJ. We don't know what's going on. But FBI sources told Brett Baer that, in all the years since then, we don't know who told Brett Baer that. Just a week before the election. And Donald Trump went out on the campaign trail and said the FBI is saying she's about to be indicted. Now, to his credit, sometime later, Brett Baer said, I was wrong. Well, no, you weren't wrong. The FBI people who used you as a megaphone, they were lying. You were used. But it still did the damage. And now, Republicans don't seem to care about all the missing text messages and emails and classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. All right. It's all buried somewhere. I don't know, in the ether. There's not even, I have a 2 gigabyte storage device linked up to my computer, but no, they didn't have the cloud.
2 terabyte or 2 gigabyte?
2 terabytes. See, there I'm corrected again.
Correcting the mistake there.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Once again, I admit I was wrong. 2 terabytes. Yes. All right. So, yes, I saved all of that. And Donald Trump has saved his late wife's body to bury her on his golf course. Perhaps you've heard about this. Yes, Ivana had a golden casket that, according to the press, was worth $125,000, but this is her last resting place. There you have it. She's at the golf course, right where you tee off for the first hole. Now, according to press reports, Trump is also saying he's planning to build a 10-plot graveyard in that same area on his golf course. Now, I can't believe that he would have the chutzpah to do this, but perhaps there are these reports that if he can classify the golf course as a cemetery, you don't have to pay property taxes. You don't have to pay income taxes on it. And who knows? When it comes to chutzpah, Trump certainly has enough of it. He took a $48,000 tax credit on one of his condos, that was meant for people who were a lot less wealthy than he was. So who knows? But who are those other 10 people that are going to, 9 people who will follow Ivana to a burial on a golf course? Yes, that is a whole new meaning for a hole in one. But one thing, as I was researching this, I said, wait, you're allowed to just bury people anywhere? So I went to look it up. People bury their dogs and their cats and their dead turtles in their backyard. And, that's not uncommon. And other people, even though it's against the law, ask to have their ashes scattered in the Pacific Ocean or on a river or in Central Park. That's where I'd like to have my ashes scattered. I love Central Park, and I feel like that's the center of the universe for me. So just take note of that, who was ever in charge of that time. And maybe that's not any crazier than burying Ivana on a golf course. But as I looked into this, do you know that in 47 states, you're allowed to bury your deceased relatives on your private property? There you go. There's only 3 states that do not allow home burials: Indiana, California, Washington. Now, New York and New Jersey, see those yellow states, Michigan. Well, you can bury them on your property, but you have to have a funeral director. They are to supervise the burial, make somebody who's licensed by the state and understands the proper procedure for burials. But see all that green? Nah, you could just bury grandma in the backyard. This way you don't have to drive down to the cemetery and put flowers, on her memorial. It's very easy. You could put a flower bed around her in the backyard. I'd never heard of people doing this, but I guess it's legal. Now, boy, I'm trying to think of a segue and it ain't coming. This is an election season, and I am going to come up and talk about, mistakes that I've made in the past, voting for certain people that I don't regret voting for them, because you make a vote in a certain time, in a certain place, because of circumstances, sometimes because of your, you don't have the knowledge you have or the maturity as you get older. But man, if you make donations this time around, I've made donations. Val Demings, Tim Ryan, Stacey Abrams, Max Rose, I've donated to, who's in. I try to find people who I think could really win and who could use the money. Now, I love Reverend Warnock, but Herschel Walker is a basket case, and Warnock's ahead, and he's got a giant war chest, really big, much bigger than Herschel Walker's. So I tend to try to divert money to different places, but I don't only send money to Democrats. I sent money to Evan McMullin, who's running. He's the former CIA agent who ran for president in the last election. And he's trying to defeat Mike Lee, who at some point was involved in this conspiracy to overthrow the election on January 6th. So Mike Lee, that's in Utah. And in that particular race, the last poll I read, Lee was up by 41%, and Evan McMullin was at 36%. And for an independent, that ain't bad. That makes it possible when you consider we have a few months to go. So let me take you back to the year 2000. I was on WABC radio, and I was supporting Ralph Nader. Of course, that was the year that the Supreme Court picked the president, basically. It was Al Gore versus George Bush. And at the time, I was upset about corporate money in politics. And one thing that really pissed me off was when Al Gore was fundraising for his campaign from the White House, which is a violation of federal law. And when he was asked about it, he said there's no controlling legal authority, meaning there was no way to charge him. But he was fundraising from his office in the White House. And Bill Clinton had accumulated this gigantic war chest. And of course, some of it came from like Denise Rich, multi-millionaires whose husband was later pardoned by Bill Clinton. Of course, no connection there. And the dog ate his homework. So for me, one of the big issues was the corporate money that swamped America's elections. So, of course, my candidate then was Ralph Nader, because that was his principal campaign position. was about money deciding elections. Now, little did I know at the time that the Supreme Court would later come down and declare that money is speech, that corporations are people, and that you can't keep them from really donating, to these PACs or other campaigns. And McCain-Feingold was struck down. Little did I know that this swell of corporate money that so offended me in the late 90s was about to become a tsunami, and it did for the last 20 years. So I was ignorant of the future. And the other thing is, like the Bernie bros, I mean, I can identify they're wrong too. When they say there was no difference between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, and many of them were saying that, I mean, it seems ridiculous to me now, but it seems ridiculous to me to look back and think there's no difference between George Bush and Al Gore. Well, George Bush, of course, was pushing the compassionate conservative line. I may be conservative fiscally, but we have to have compassion for people. Little did I know that a vote for George Bush was a vote for Dick Cheney. And that for at least the first term, Dick Cheney was going to be the president running the White House, and the one who created the insular organizations that gathered erroneous information to lead us into war in Iraq. Now, when George Bush, in the very beginning, you may not remember, we had now we're talking about Nancy Pelosi possibly going to Taiwan and igniting some sort of military action with communist China. But back then, do you remember? There was a communist Chinese plane that forced down our EP-3 spy plane onto Hainan Island. And the crew was on board. And at that point, I was on ABC radio, and it was crazy then too. People were saying, I'm not going to Chinese restaurants. I said, what do you... The people that run Chinese restaurants, they're not from China. I said, what are you going to do? Boycott bok choy? I'd be on the radio. I'm not going to go to Radio Shack. Everything they have in Radio Shack is made in Red China. And Rush go, and it's the Chi-Coms who stole our plane. And there was actually, who was it? Rumsfeld, I believe, who said we should send the Sixth Fleet into the China Sea and confront the Chinese. And there were people who thought it was worth going to war to get our EP-3 back. So there were the same war hawks that misled us into war in Iraq. Also, they were pretty nonchalant about confronting China head on, even militarily, about that EP-3. And George Bush, he listened to two people that talked him down and said, have our calmer heads speak to their calmer heads, because there were people on the military people on the Red Chinese side who were also hawkish, and we had our hawks on our side. And he said, have our calmer heads talk to their calmer heads, and we'll get through this. And the two people he talked to were Colin Powell and his father. And we eventually got every person back, every American service person back. And we eventually got the plane back. It came back in pieces, but we got it back. But we averted war. And it was a possibility at that point in time. So George Bush did well. And I said, oh, this is going to be all right. But boy, was I wrong. Now, as I said earlier, if Al Gore had been elected, we might have had 20 years of policies dealing with climate change, since that was or that became his major objective. I don't think it was in the campaign, but it was possibly a piece of it. And there was a big difference between Al Gore and Dick Cheney. Although Al Gore's vice president was Joe Lieberman. And he's pretty much a hawk who sides with Republicans as well. So when you're looking back and you're trying to figure out different things and how they would have developed, there's a lot of strings attached to different paths in history. There's a multiverse out there that is supposed to be limitless. Okay, so in the year 2000, I voted for Ralph Nader. And I supported Ralph Nader. And I was asked to go on CNN. Do you remember Crossfire? Crossfire was the real show. But look at how simple it was back then. Crossfire hosted by Bill Press. I just asked Albert, what happened to Bill Press? He said, what happened to Richard Bey? And Rich Lowry, from the National Review. And they asked 3 talk show hosts to come on the show and talk about different candidates while the case in Florida was being decided. This is before the Supreme Court decision. And we had the Brooks Brothers riot to stop the counting and court decisions to keep it going. And Catherine Harris, if you remember all of this mishigas going on down there. It was myself. It was Bernie Ward, who was a big Gore supporter and Democrat, and Larry Elder, who actually didn't vote for George Bush. He voted for the Libertarian candidate that year. But Larry Elder, you may remember, was a talk show host, and he ran for governor of California, right? When they were trying to recall Gavin Newsom. Now, he didn't win. But here is that clip. And notice how elementary, there's no graphics. The studio looks terrible. It's like all black and inside of it. But we've come a long way since the year 2000, and so have I. And here's that clip from Crossfire.
To this special edition of Crossfire. I'm Bill Press, here tonight with Rich Lowry of the National Review. And nobody's got a better feel for how the American people are dealing with our unpresidential election than radio talk show hosts. Tonight, we turn to 3 of the best and 3 of the most outspoken in the country. First, Bernie Ward. He's a liberal talk show host from KGOS Radio in San Francisco. Larry Elder's author of 10 Things You Can't Say in America and an afternoon host at KABC Radio in Los Angeles. And Richard Bey, another liberal and a supporter of Ralph Nader, who appears on weekday evenings on WABC Radio in New York. Rich, take it away.
Let's start off with Richard Bey here. Richard, just give us very briefly, in a sentence or so, what are you hearing from your listeners on this controversy down in Florida?
Well, the ones that pick up the phone to call are fervently faithful to ideology. Now, I was described as a liberal. I would say that I have someone describe me as a radical centrist. That's how I describe myself. But it seems like people forfeit thinking for themselves or even consistency and logic sometimes just to root for their team. That's what I'm finding.
Do we have Gene Ward there?
Bernie Ward?
I'm sorry, yeah. Bernie, just one, very briefly, what are you hearing? Sorry about that.
Very briefly, all right. It's very simple. Al Gore went over the top with my listeners when Al Gore said, look, count them all. I'll sign that says I'll accept the decision of what the final count is. No lawyers, no courts, nothing. Just count them all and let's see and let the chips fall where they may. Once Gore took that position, then pretty much the debate about this is why doesn't Bush want to go along with it? What's he afraid of? And that's been the position of my listeners now for a number of days.
But we have Larry Elder. We want to say good evening, Larry. Sorry about that little technical difficulty. But first, if I want to ask you the same question we ask everybody else at the beginning, just in one quick sentence, great program, a lot of callers. What's the mood of the public as you sense it in Southern California about this whole recount?
Well, as far as my callers are concerned, guys, people believe that George W. Bush won Florida. He won Florida. Then there was a automatic recount as is prescribed by the statute. He won that. If you cannot figure out how to properly push the dimple through, and the instructions are given to you, they say if there are any hanging chips, you're supposed to scrape them off before you give the voting person your ballot. If you're too negligent or too stupid to figure that out, then that's just too bad. The machines were designed to eliminate human error and tampering. That's how people feel. This is nuts. Look, I don't have a dog in this fight. Let me finish. I'm an independent, and I voted for the Libertarian candidate, Harry Brown, so I don't care which one of these guys wins, and I don't feel there's all that much difference between the two of them ideologically. But look at it from a commonsensical standpoint. Why did they design the ballot machine? The idea was to eliminate human error, the potential for fraud. Okay, you have a vote, you have another vote, and now 95% of the voters in Florida were somehow able to navigate their way through the ballot, and we're supposed to figure out what the other 5% of the dummies were trying to do. It doesn't make any sense.
Larry, can I ask you just one quick question? It's a yes or no answer. Do you ever go to an ATM and have an ATM break down or not work?
If there is machine malfunction or fraud, absolutely there should be a manual recount. And since no one is alleging that, this doesn't make any sense. In fact, because the election is so precise, all the more reason to exclude these voters who were unable to vote successfully. I'm sorry. Right. When I took my SAT, they said fill out the thing. If you don't fill it out properly, it doesn't count.
Larry, that was a yes or no answer. Thank you for the longest yes or no answer in history. Rich Lowry.
Our guests will be in Crossfire's chat room at the bottom of the hour. Just log on to cnn.com/crossfire. Bill and I continue to talk the talk with our radio talk show hosts after this break.
All right, I must have left it out of the editing, but there was a point where Bill Press asked me, since the election was so close in Florida, didn't Ralph Nader act as a spoiler? In the end, there were only 535 votes between them with what they counted. And if, according to the press reports that I've read, if they counted every vote across the state, then Al Gore would have won. But that wasn't what Al Gore requested. Anyway, but at one point I said the difference between Al Gore and George Bush is the difference between having Harvey Weinstein come to dinner at the White House or the CEO of Halliburton. And, I no longer think that's the case. But looking back on it, it gives me some affinity with those Bernie bros who said, hey, there's no difference between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, which I think is even a more severe contrast. But, that was me. That was me back then. So finally, I've kept this as a treat. Someone I know has a contact in the Secret Service, and they actually got the recordings of the text messages and the verbal communications that the Secret Service and the Homeland Security Director were all making between them. And I'm going to reveal them here for the first time. Here it is. Wait a second. What happened? What happened? Oh. It got deleted. It got deleted, and I didn't have it on backup. Thank you for joining me here today. And as always, from all of us here to all of you out there, remember to share this podcast, to subscribe and never miss one, and know that, as always, we offer you all our best. Take care.